Thank you all. Oh, is this working? I can't really tell. Thank you all so much for coming. A couple of housekeeping announcements just before we start. In the case of a fire, we don't plan on there being a fire, but if there is a fire, the fire exit is there. If anyone needs the toilet, it's through the doors, down the stairs to the right. There won't be an interval, so if you do need the toilet, do feel free to go mid-performance, but just try and be as quiet as possible. Great. Okay, so the title of this concert is Grasping for Beauty in a Broken World. And so we're going to be exploring this idea of beauty and brokenness, kind of going hand in hand through the lens of music and Christianity. The first piece that we're playing is by a guy called Bloch, written in the 20th century, and it's called Prayer, and it truly does invoke a kind of just the sound of a sung prayer or hymn.
next song that I'm going to play for you guys is one of my own compositions. It's called Prismectra. It was inspired by trying to encapsulate in sound the vibe of refracted light. So it's inspired by light rays and prisms and rainbows. And there's a certain fragility in refracted light. So this piece uses mostly harmonics on the cello, which is achieved. It's basically you play an overtone instead of an actual note by touching very lightly the strings, and you get quite a unique higher sound than you would normally get on the cello. And I will be also kind of singing along with that, so kind of the fragility of the human voice and the fragility of harmonics. So I hope you enjoy.
Okay, the next piece that I'm going to play is by a guy called Tedesco, who was composing in the 20th century. And he wrote a set of 28 piano pieces, all following kind of the stories of the life of Jesus. Now, I'm not going to play all 28, as I'm sure you'll be thankful. But I will play 4 of them. Now, the 4 that I'm going to play are written in your program, but I won't be playing them in that order. Well, I might be. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. So I want you to try and guess which one I'm playing based on the title. So you'll have to be thinking while I'm playing. So, do people think they know which one it was? I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask anyone to shout out. But 2 of them, 2 out of the 4, involve water, and 2 don't. So, if you think that piece represented water in some way, raise your hand. Wow. If you think it didn't, raise your hand. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, it did represent water in some way or another. So we've narrowed it down to either Jesus walks on the waves or by the Sea of Galilee. Okay, raise your hand if you think it's Jesus walking on the waves. And raise your hand if you think it's by the Sea of Galilee. Ooh, most of you are correct. It is Jesus walking on the waves. Okay, piece number 2, which isn't necessarily piece number 2 on the list. Okay, who thought that piece represented water? No one. Okay, great. It didn't. Okay, so now we're left with Jesus and the Money Changers and Mary Magdalene. Put your hand up if you think it was Mary Magdalene. No one. Great. Who put your hand up if you think it was Jesus and the Money Changers? Perfect. You're all right. Okay, the next two are slightly harder, but we've still got By the Sea of Galilee and Mary Magdalene left. So, see if you can get the third one. Okay, who's feeling confident? All right, who thinks that it had something to do with water? Ooh, who thinks that it absolutely had nothing to do with water? Ooh, undecided. It did have something to do with water. It was by the Sea of Galilee. Yeah. Okay, so we now only have Mary Magdalene left, so I'm not going to get you to guess the last one. But for those of you who don't know the story of Mary Magdalene, the story that Tedesco was referencing in this piece is actually such a beautiful story about a woman who, by the world, was rejected as a sinner. and outcast, but at the feet of Jesus found acceptance and forgiveness. So this is Mary Magdalene.
Next, I'm going to do something slightly risky. I'm going to improvise a little bit. And as this performance is kind of centered around exploring faith through music, I'm going to improvise as I like to do sometimes on text. I often enjoy improvising inspired by a certain image or a certain text. So I thought I would do it on a bit of the Bible, a bit of poetry within the Bible that is very meaningful to me. It was written by the ancient Hebrew king David. Most of us know him as a giant slayer, but he did a great many things and had a very interesting life. And one of the things he did was write a lot of poetry. And this, I'm just going to read a very short section, but it was at a time when he was actually surrounded by enemies and being attacked. And yet in that he found some comfort, some hope in the midst of some anguish and pain and fear. So it really is such a beautiful text. So it's Psalm 56. It says, "You have kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? Then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? So I think a lot of us sense the other in the universe. We might call it different things, but for me that is a God, and it helps me every day to know that, what can man do to me? What is the worst that can happen in this world? So I think music is one of those places where we can unite and find that other, that beauty. So I'm going to make some sounds, hopefully some of them beautiful. I'm not promising. Emphasis on sounds might be a bit more experimental here. We might hear some rattling, some wind, some groaning, whatever comes out. But I'm just going to improvise a little bit based on what I've read, and I hope you can enjoy and reflect on that. Next up is Sicilian, which is a lovely, sweet song attributed to Maria von Paradis. Hope you enjoy. I'm going to be playing the prelude from Bach's Second Suite in D minor. This is a very special of his suites for the solo cello to me because it is I'm often attracted to the melancholy and dark, and this is one of those pieces. And a lot of cellists who play these suites, which are some of the best pieces ever written for cello, and no one will disagree with me, I'm sure. A lot of people sense very deep spirituality in them, and Stephen Isserlis, the great cellist, he references the life of Christ throughout the progression of the cello suites, and this one, he says, is the Agony in the Garden, because it is very profound and very deep. It ends with 5 stark chords, and he says that they're like the 5 wounds of Christ.
Cool. The next piece has a bit of a personal story behind it. But before I tell you the story, I'd like to ask everyone a quick question. Put your hand up. We're doing hands again. Put your hand up if you've ever had a joke explained to you. Yeah. Put your hand up if you've ever had anyone trying to analyze humor and pick apart why it's funny. Yeah. Okay, put your hand up if you think that explaining a joke makes it more funny. No. Yeah, while explaining a joke can be funny just because it's so ridiculous to do so, I don't think many people would actually think that it improves on the joke. And up until a few years ago, I would have wholeheartedly agreed that explaining a joke kills it. But now, I'm less sure that that is necessarily the case. Excuse me. During my undergrad degree, I lived with a very interesting guy who had a habit of thinking very deeply about and verbally processing just about anything, including humor. And to be honest, at first it was quite annoying. I would want to just laugh, have a bit of banter, and not have to pick apart why the jokes were funny. But over time, I actually started to appreciate this. What happened was, as we started to explain to each other why we thought different jokes were funny, why we laughed at different times, we almost started to kind of curate our own ultimate sense of humor. We now know in great detail what kind of jokes the other will laugh at. And I can confidently say that while at first he was a little bit annoying, he's grown on me to become one of the most funny people I've ever known. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, I think we can take a similar approach to beauty. It's easy to find things beautiful or to experience beauty and never actually stop to think, what about it is beautiful? What about it is beautiful? Yeah, so I'd like to share with you my journey in trying to unpack why beauty is beautiful. When I realized that music was becoming kind of my career pathway, I started to ask myself the question, what is beauty? Quite a big question to try and answer. And I started approaching it very conceptually and very kind of academically. And I won't bore you with all the conceptual nonsense I came up with. But one question that stuck out early on as particularly important to address was this. What is beautiful in the midst of pain? What is beautiful in the midst of pain? Surely true beauty should be able to stand up to the weight of pain. Now, up until this point, my thoughts on the subject had been mainly conceptual, but the search for beauty was going to enter my life in a very practical and personal way. I've always been quite a driven person, and this came out most of all in the final year of my undergraduate degree. I realized quite early on that cramming didn't work for me, sadly. So I set out to make myself into the most productive version of myself possible. I'd wake up at 6:30 every day, practice all morning, break for lunch, practice in the afternoon, do a bit of exercise, just so that my mind would have the capacity to go to the lunch and work on essays and compositions all the evening till about 10 p.m. I'd go home, go to bed, and start all over the next day. And this went on for months during uni. If someone had asked me during that time if I wanted a first, I probably would have said something along the lines of, well, it would be nice, but I don't mind either way. And while I'm sure at the time I believed that that was true, it would have been a massive lie. Of course I wanted a first. Of course I wanted a first. I had always had success academically and in just about anything else I set my mind to. So why should I set my hope any lower? At this point, my hope was in success. Anyway, that period ended, and I moved off to Manchester to start my master's. And I remember clearly the day that I got my certificate in the post. I sat on my bed alone. I opened it up. I looked down. I got a first. Yay. I just stared at it. All this time, I'd been so afraid that I wouldn't get what I'd hoped for, that I hadn't stopped to think about whether what I hoped for was worth hoping for. That summer, I started to spiral. So many existential questions started flooding my mind, and they were simply met with apathy. The success, that I'd hoped for and that had made up so much of my identity was meaningless. I thought that when work started, I'd get my drive back and things would go back to normal, but that wasn't the case. After all, it wasn't that I needed to work harder and succeed more. I'd got what I'd hoped for and realized that it wasn't enough. The next few months were probably some of the most painful of my life. Every day I woke up and didn't want to live out that day. It felt as though I was walking through mud. Everything required such an incredible amount of effort and energy that many days I would spend all day in bed or on the sofa. And so the search for beauty in the midst of pain began. Sadly, what I found was that much of what I'd once thought beautiful or fulfilling was, at best, empty, or at worst, utterly detrimental. But nevertheless, the search for beauty continued, and I found myself spiraling out of control, caught in truly vicious and harmful cycles. Until one day I found myself in church. I'd been a regular churchgoer for my whole life. My parents were Christians, brought me up Christian, and so being in church was a fairly normal thing, but this Sunday was different. Up until that point, well, not up until that point, but for that period of time, while I was in church, what was said tended to go just in one ear and out the other. But this Sunday was different. I sat there, ashamed, confused, desperate. I cried out in prayer to Jesus, basically asking him to show me if he could satisfy, if he was beautiful. I'd heard my whole life people saying things like, only Jesus can truly satisfy, but at that point, that wasn't my experience. And so I cried out in prayer to Jesus. And graciously, he heard and answered my prayer. And in answering my prayer, he provided a simple answer to my question. What is beautiful in the midst of pain? True hope. I've been close before when my hope for success had driven me to work hard, but ultimately I'd chosen a hope that, when put to the test, crumbled to pieces. But in Jesus, I found a hope that could stand the weight of my pain and doubts. Now, what happened after that Sunday? And what does this hope actually look like? Well, I'd be lying if I said that since then everything's been nothing but sunshine and blue skies. But that prayer was a turning point. I'd like to share with you 3 ways that Jesus has given me hope for my past, my present, and my future. Firstly, hope for my past. While my search for beauty had not only been unsatisfactory, it had also been far from pure or innocent. I knew when I came to God in prayer that I'd fallen so far from his standards. But Jesus gives grace. Jesus gives grace. When he died on that cross for me, he took the weight of all of my sin, all of my wrongdoings, all of my offenses. And what that means is that when I come to God in prayer now, I have hope that I am forgiven. I have hope in his grace. Second, hope for my present. I do have a tendency to, when things get stressful, to kind of spiral out of control and think that I need to use all my strength to hold my little world together. But this is not the case. In Jesus, I have hope that my prayers are heard. And not only are they heard, but I'm praying to someone who can genuinely make change to my situation. What a marvelous truth. I hope in his provision. And finally, hope for my future. As a Christian, while pain is a very present reality, we have hope that there are better days to come. And this isn't a hope that tomorrow might be slightly less painful than today. God promises that he will remake all of creation and wipe away every tear from the faces of those who believe in him. What a powerful promise and beautiful hope. I hope in his promises. There's a really nice Bible passage which sums this up nicely, if I can find it. It's in the book of Romans by a guy called Paul, who suffered greatly while he was following Jesus. And he writes this: "Therefore, since we've been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us." Now, what does this all have to do with the next piece? Well, this piece was a piece that was particularly powerful for me through this kind of period of depression. And it's based on a lamenting hymn written in the 1500s. And it's a truly heart-wrenching little piece. The first words of the hymn are, "I call to you, Lord Jesus Christ. I beg, hear my complaint. Grant me grace at this time. Let me not despair." This has been my prayer, and God rescued me. Now, as I play, I'd like to leave you with two fairly deep but important questions to ask yourselves and reflect on. First, what do I put my hope in? And second, can it truly bear the weight of pain? What do I put my hope in? And can it truly bear the weight of pain? The next piece is a little bit more lighthearted, by a guy called Liszt, and it's kind of going over a legend of a saint who walked on water. Allegedly, he wanted to cross this body of water, and he asked these sailors to take him across. And they refused, so he was like, okay, cool, I'm just going to walk on the water. It's a great piece, very hopeful, very triumphant in the end. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy.
Our final piece is by 4A. It's a piece called Elegy. It's really pretty. Hope you enjoy. like to thank you all so much for coming. It was such a pleasure to have you all, and I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, there is tea and coffee at the back, so please do hang around and chat and enjoy yourselves. On the back of the programs we have a wee feedback form, and if you have any questions, please do feel free to contact either of the churches who have so kindly helped host this event. So a big thanks to the Tron for letting us use this beautiful space, and to Greenview Church for helping organise this, and also a thanks to the Conservatoire for letting me use their fantastic cello. So I hope once again that you really enjoyed tonight, and thank you all so much for coming and for giving us this time of your evening, and enjoy the rest of your night.